to today's lecture. Today we'll be looking at the component of human computer interaction, which is the physical ergonomics. So, the topic of ergonomics has three broad branches, we can say. First being the physical ergonomics, second the cognitive ergonomics, and third is the organizational ergonomics. So, the first one, which is the physical ergonomics, it deals with the human body and the effect of load or work on the body's output or the efficiency. So, especially when it comes to the physical output generation or repetitive motion, and how when it is not paid attention to or it is not corrected, how it can lead to musculoskeletal injuries, then how the efficiency is to be improved, at the same time ensuring that the physical body does not undergo any harm. This is broadly the physical ergonomics, wherein we look at improving the working environment. For example, the office chair and table combination, a lot of work has gone into that area, because especially nowadays with the kind of work we do, which is mostly sedentary, people who have to sit in their chair for 8 hours at a stretch or maybe more, so they usually end up with a lot of issues pertaining to their spine and their neck. So that is one example of physical ergonomics. The others are also, we can see many examples around us, like somebody who's breaking stones in the quarry, or even the people who are laying bricks for the construction. So the repetitive motion of picking a brick, applying the mortar, placing it in line, and doing that over and over can lead to these injuries. Also, people who are working in the factories, so when they are doing this repetitive motion, even if it is a small action like checking the items when we go to a store and somebody is bagging our products, so even that motion over time, if it is not observed for any problems, it can also lead to some musculoskeletal injuries. Next area, which is the cognitive ergonomics, that deals with our cognition, that how can we make systems and information easy for the brain to process. So when the information which is presented to us is not arranged in a proper manner, or it is not, the data is very complex, which is not organized well, so all of this can lead to an increased load on the mind of the human being. So how do we decrease this load? So perception, memory, reasoning, and motor responses, they all affect how someone interacts with and performs with their work. So that is the broadly the area of cognition, and how, with what means, we'll see some examples and ways in which this load can be reduced on the worker. And the third area, which is the organizational ergonomics, it is an area which combines both the physical and the cognitive ergonomics, and it looks at these areas, larger organizations, where a combination of these can be improved so as to improve the efficiency and output of the user. So over time we have seen that how even these phones have been made simpler for the workers to use. So rather than using one hand for the purpose of holding the phone at all times over the ear, now we have these headphones with attached microphone with the mic, wherein the person can work hands free. So some ways in which the output can be improved. So there are a few ways in which humans interact with the outside world, how we perceive the environment and the information that is presented to us. And since we were a little child, little baby, did perceive with our senses, some of which are the visual channel, which are the eyes, then we have the auditory channel, the ears, the haptic channel, which is the touch, and the motor channel, which is the movements. So with all of these combined, we function, in our daily life, and these are the channels through which we take in information, and then we process it, and then we act accordingly. And also knowing that humans have limited capacity to process information, so this also leads to certain design implications. Now in this diagram here we can see the visual perception. So, visual perception refers to the ability to interpret and make sense of the visual information from the information that is presented to us with the help of our sight. And here we can see that the cycle of interaction wherein the user is perceiving the information. So, let us assume there are two buttons on the screen. One is green which says OK and a red which says cancel. And then the next is the cognition. So, the brain perceives it that green stands for, and as per our previous experiences also, we know that OK means go ahead, green means go ahead, and red and cancel means to stop. So, then this cognition perceives this information, and finally based on the action we want to take, we will take that physical action of either clicking OK or cancel, and then that makes a difference, or it helps us take an action, and then the next cycle continues wherein the next page offers us some more information, and then again the cycle continues. So, now this is a complex process, although it takes milliseconds for the humans to perceive, maybe few seconds depending on the type of information, and then to take action and this cycle to complete. But it is a very complex process where first we are perceiving the information, and this is done by detection of light by the eye, and then this ends with the interpretation of the visual stimuli that we receive by the brain. So, this highly complex system is something that we use on a daily basis, and we probably don't even realize that how much of a complex system it is. So, it also becomes important for designers to then decrease this cognitive load, because when there is so much of stimulus that is given to us, the brain can get overloaded. So, how do we decrease these cognitive loads on the brain? That becomes very important. So, if you have ever used any website wherein probably there were too many text, or text was too small, or there were many inconsistencies there, probably you can recall that it probably gave us all a headache. It did not give a very pleasant feeling to browse on that website. But when there is a website which has information which is properly organized, there is hierarchy, the text is readable, the colors are not too bright or harsh on the eye, so there the browsing experience is much more pleasant. So, similarly, when we are getting this visual stimuli, this chaotic stimuli on a regular basis, of course, it is going to at some point increase the cognitive load on the brain, because if there's too much text, we have to find the exact information we are looking for. So, we'll be browsing, we'll be scrolling through the pages, looking at different pages, clicking buttons. And for example, if you're finding support, we are not able to find the support button. So, we will then get frustrated at some point. But when the information is laid out properly and easily for the eyes to perceive, brain to perceive, then we can quickly find the support button. So, that is how it becomes very important in the design process that we include this understanding of the stimulus that is perceived by the eyes. So, some ways in which we can ensure that this confusion or frustration does not take place. So, like I just gave the example of a website. So, maintaining the hierarchy of information or hierarchy of the text, ensuring that there is a heading, and then the heading is of a certain size, the following text is of a different size, the important information is highlighted, it is maybe there is some color contrast so as to pick out the most important information. Maybe some texts are larger or bolder and more prominent so that the focus will quickly go there. Also, using the Gestalt principles, so we know that certain items can be clubbed together so that we can easily find them. So, clubbing some of the important information together in groups, in clusters, so that we know that where will we find this particular information. Then, how will one pay attention and will focus? So, what can we do for that particular area so that the attention is not lost? So, if we read the newspaper, when you see that there is a certain column width that we are reading, and that width is important because when we are reading the next line, so the eye is traveling the first line till the end and coming back on the second line, so that it does not lose track of where it was reading earlier. If this line were double or triple the length, then the eye may get confused and it may go to the third line or fourth line and the continuity will break. So these simple things have to be taken care of and considered when we are designing. The next is our auditory perception. So auditory deals with the hearing, and when there is a sound in the environment, so it reaches the ear, and then the noise is cancelled out by the ear, and only the important meaningful information that it is seeking, it reaches the ear, and that is how then we hear it and then respond to it. So that is the very basic mechanism of it. Now the ear has a certain range in which we can hear. Humans have a certain range in which we can hear things. Animals have a different range. And in humans also, over time, as we are getting older, this range gets smaller and smaller. So the hearing gets weaker and weaker as well. Now, there are some other reasons also which can affect the hearing, which are the environmental reasons. So there's a lot of loud noise going on. We are sitting in a class studying, and then there somebody is drilling the wall, the neighbor is drilling, or somebody's truck is in the driveway. So that environmental noise can also disturb us, or we lose our focus, we lose our attention, we'll not be able to follow along what we're trying to hear. So when it comes to interpretation of sound, we do it in many ways, but two broad ways of doing it is the cognitive process. So in this cognitive processing, so once we detect the sound, the brain processes it and it attaches it with certain meaning, certain action based on some prior experience maybe, or on the context. So for example, sometimes we hear a beep when our washing machine is done washing the clothes. There is an alert beep which tells us that the clothes are washed and we now need to hang them out. Then there is the other one, which is the associative learning. So here the users learn to associate certain sounds with certain actions. So in our cell phones, you may notice that we have a different beep sound for the ringtone and a different one for the alarm, so that we can differentiate between the two. Even for the SMS, it is different, and for the other application messages, it is a different sound, so that we can distinguish between them. Also, we have the auditory icons. So these are the natural sounds that represent specific actions or objects. So for example, the crumpling of paper has a very specific sound. So when we are communicating or using the interacting with the computer, so there we are, for example, throwing the paper into the trash can, and then this crumpling paper noise tells us, it gives us that feedback that the paper has been discarded, and it is making that noise of the discarded paper. So also the speech feedback. So sometimes there are words or there are phrases which provide us with the direct feedback rather than a sound which we associate with certain action. So this speech helps guide the user. It tells them certain information and gives them instructions so that they can follow along and do it. And why this auditory perception is important is because it enhances the usability, because certain times we are doing a particular action or involved in an activity where the visual perception is also involved. So during those times, the auditory information can be another layer of providing the information to the user. So rather than employ our visual perception at all times for so many different activities, the auditory feedback can also help us get that information. So for example, in case of say people who are deaf, they cannot hear. So the ring that we have in the house, the doorbell, so they cannot hear the doorbell. So they have a light installed in the house which lights up when somebody is ringing the doorbell. And now in this particular case, they have to rely on their eyes at most of the times, because for them the hearing is diminished and they have to rely on their visual perception. And in case where somebody does not have the eyesight, they are losing it or it's poor, or they don't have the vision, in that case they will mostly rely on the auditory inputs. But where someone who has both these functions working to average level, so there we have to see that how the auditory and visual, they both can be involved so that one is not overloaded. Also, the effect of sound or the response of the human being of the sound is, one is the immediate reaction. So certain sounds that we hear, they can trigger immediate reaction. So for example, the fire alarm starts blaring, so everybody will panic and they will want to know if there has been a fire situation and do they need to evacuate the room. And the other is the behavioral adaptations. So now sometimes we get used to and we adapt to certain sounds. So for example, some will tell us that some testing is going on, so don't enter the room, or some drill is going on, and so on and so forth. So these are some ways in which the response to a sound is perceived by the human being. The next perception is that of the haptic perception. So which means the touch, and touch also tells us about the environment. So here we have the skin receptors which, when we touch a certain object, so then they get the information depending on whether we are pressing something or clicking something or moving something, and then again this information goes to our cognition, to our brain, and then it makes the muscle move and the action is taken, there is motion, and this again continues. So these receptors, they track the texture, they can look at the pressure, vibration, all of these factors, and based on that the information will go to the brain. So when we are touching, for example, a glass to drink water, and when we are touching a petal of a flower, so in both these conditions we are applying a different type of pressure. So when we are holding the glass, depending again whether it is a glass made of crystal or is it a glass made of steel, stainless steel, the way we will hold it will also differ. And again, depending on whether it is empty or if it has a liquid, again our eyes will see. If it is not able to see, if it is opaque, then the receptors will tell us about the weight, and depending on that we will carefully pick up the glass and will ensure that the liquid doesn't spill. When we are touching a petal of the flower, we want to see the texture of it, then we are going to apply a different type of a pressure on it. If we use the same pressure as that of the glass that we had used, then we will end up squashing the petal. So this information also is perceived with the eyes, with the skin receptors. So all of this put together informs the brain how much pressure is to be applied. Similarly, when we have different buttons that need to be pressed, so some buttons need to be flicked up or down, other buttons need to be rotated, some buttons have to be pressed. So how much force is required, how much pressure is required, how much turning or twisting is required, how do we hold this? So all of this information the brain perceives depending on the feedback it is getting through the haptic channel. Now, motor perception refers to the process by which the users perceive and coordinate their physical movements to interact with the digital systems. So this involves the brain's ability to plan and execute the actions. So like I was mentioning that for the buttons, that how much pressure is to be applied, so whether we have to grasp it, whether we have to point, whether you have to manipulate any object. So all of those things, these motor functions, this is required for the brain to plan out and again then execute it. This also is a very quick response. So it again is a very complex system of how this is done, and but again the brain does it at a very quick pace. Now I just discussed a few examples of how we are perceiving the item or the product front of us, glass or a petal. So this becomes very important part of the study when we are designing for, say, people who have been amputated. So if somebody has lost their arm, whether above elbow or below elbow, and they have been fitted with an artificial arm, so that artificial arm does not really know that whether the glass has to be held loosely or tightly. So the if the right pressure is not applied, then the arm can drop the glass, or it can also squash the glass. If it is a paper cup or a plastic cup, it can also squash it. So then we understand that how important the motor functions and the haptics are, because we tend to take a lot of things for granted and we do not understand the importance of it, and the importance of how quickly the brain is processing all this information, and it is making us make a move onto the action that is required from us. So nowadays we have, in our digital systems, we have these buttons that have to be, we slide those buttons or we click the buttons. So sometimes these vibrations from the screen that we get, so it communicates to us whether that action has taken place or not. So the motor skills that I was talking about, we can club them broadly in two categories. One is the gross motor skills and the other is the fine motor skills. So the gross motor skills are where we have not very precise motions, but some large motions that we make. So for example, on a tablet, if we are changing the page, so there is no one point where we have to click or drag to change the page. We can just probably swipe anywhere and the page will change. But the fine motor functions are where we have to be very precise. So for example, clicking the button for OK or cancel. So that is an example where we have to be precise, because if we are not, then we will end up clicking the wrong button and we will either cancel the next step or we will go ahead when we did not want to go ahead with that particular step. So if you look at the working model of the memory, we see that we have sensory memory, which leads to the short term or working memory, and finally the long term memory. So sensory memory is the buffer for stimuli received through the senses. So we have seen that we broadly receive information through these four channels, and for each of these channels that we have seen, there is a separate channel. So for the visual stimuli, we have a different channel. For our auditory, we have a different channel, and so on. So we are receiving for one particular action also, maybe all four are involved, like pressing a button, maybe a precise motor function, for example. So now all of these channels are giving the information, clubbing the information, eyes, ears, haptics. So they're all combining this information, and then this information is passed on to the short term memory by attention. So attention is the act of paying attention and concentrating. So if the attention is missing, if we are mindlessly doing something, then it will not register in our short term memory. But if we are also paying attention to what is happening, so for example, if somebody is paying attention that green stands for OK, go ahead, then that information goes into our short term memory, that green color we start associating with OK, go ahead. Or we can say maybe orange, a new website with a new design idea, they are saying orange is a new green, and now they want to replace green with orange. So if you are paying attention, then of course we will register orange as the OK or go button. But if you're not, then we may not be able to recall this information from our brain. So the short term or working memory is responsible for storing and managing all the information that has reached it, that it requires, along with other cognitive skills to perform tasks like learning and reasoning. And it focuses on memory in action and has the ability to temporarily recall information, and it can be held only temporarily because it decays, it starts dying. So if this information is not recalled and if it is not rehearsed, then over time we will forget this information we will maybe replace it with something else, and this will not stay in our memory. So, for example, if I say what is the largest mammal on the planet? So, if we have paid attention to when we were reading this particular fact and it registered, and we were probably awed by the answer of to this question, so now it has registered itself in our memory. And now if this is in the short term memory, but we go about our day and our month and our year without referring back to it or any a reference of this information, then maybe after a year or two we may forget that what is the largest mammal. But if, for example, the same day we go back, we discuss with a friend, what is the largest mammal on the planet, and then maybe we do this again a few more times in the week, then this information will get ingrained in our short term memory and we will retain this for longer. But of course, again, if we for a long time do not recall this, then there are chances that we may tend to forget it. Now, working memory is also used when we're performing a task where we have to remember and do something at the same time. So, if it is, for example, operating a certain machinery, so where does it turn on from? Then what do we do? What is the next step? And so on. So, certain steps that have to be done in a certain order. So, if we don't practice it enough, if we don't do it enough, we'll forget. So, for example, even softwares like Photoshop or other softwares that we use on a daily basis. So, if we don't use the lasso tool for quite some time or any other tool, then we'll probably forget. Or if we are using after a long time, we will wonder that from where do we create the new layer, for example. So, now similarly, many other areas require these steps to be undertaken, and this is stored in our short term memory. So, a simple example of this is the phone number. So, there is a certain way in which we remember the phone number. So, for the code 91, and then we club the numbers together, then a chunk of number and a chunk of number, so that it helps us remember the phone number altogether. Otherwise, it is sometimes very difficult to remember those 10 digits. And finally, we have the long term memory. So, long term memory is where the most storage of the memory system, it's the largest or the main storage area of the memory, and it stores all the factual information, the experiential knowledge that we have gained over time, and also the procedural rules of behavior. So, for example, we know that the red light should not be crossed, we have to wait for green, or that we should not run across the road, but we should use the zebra crossing. So, long term memory is the main storage of the memory system where we save factual information, where we save our experiential information, experiences over time that we have had, which help us remember things which need to be recalled, maybe some procedural rules of behavior. So, all of these come under the long term memory. So, for example, not crossing the red light or not running across the street, but looking for the proper crossing from where one can safely cross the road. Now, in this particular area, when we reach the long term memory, here forgetting happens much more slowly. So, once the information has reached our long term memory after rehearsal, which is the key here for making the memory stick to the long term part of the whole memory system. So, then the forgetting happens a little bit more slowly as compared to our short term or the working memory. And rehearsal is the process of repeating the information over and over again. So, maybe if not every day, once in a while, recalling it, discussing with family member or friends, so that the memory becomes ingrained in our memory, this information. So, whether verbally we are doing it or we are reading it or we are doing it mentally, but we are keeping that information alive in our memory. So, here we can see that when the information is incoming, it goes to our sensory memory area, which is the senses which are acquiring this information. If we are not paying attention to it, so it just dies out, we just forget it. But when we are paying attention, then it goes to our working memory. And when we are at the working memory, so we are then rehearsing it continuously. And if you're not doing that, then again this decays, or we forget it, or it dies. But when we are rehearsing it, then we see that it is encoded into the long term memory. So there it stays. Now it has been shifted to the long term memory section, and then whenever we want to retrieve it, we can retrieve this information. But again, this also is not a permanent memory, because if it is not accessed for a very long time, or again depending on if we are aging or many other medical factors, the forgetting can still take place. And there are two types of long term memories. So one is the episodic memory, which is the memory of the event and experience in serial form that we recall, and the other is semantic memory, so which structures the record of facts, concepts and skills that we acquire. So this brings us to the end of today's lecture. I hope you were able to understand and follow along the important components of human computer interaction, which are these four broad senses that help us perceive information, and this helps the designer to take the appropriate steps, like we saw in the visual stimuli, that how the hierarchy, color, contrast, all of these aspects can help in designing better interfaces. Also the auditory, where we are giving different beeps and sounds, but also ensuring that there are not too many different sounds or beeps, and given the freedom to the user, which will ensure that the user is using those many sounds that they can distinguish between, barring few sounds that are of course universally understood, so which are for some emergency situations, or the ambulance when we are driving and we hear that alarm of the ambulance, so everybody tries to give way to the ambulance, or even the game shows that we see where somebody gives a wrong answer, so there is a certain sound, and at the right answer there is a different sound. Or when we are playing a game ourselves also, there also how certain wrong steps will maybe also give us some haptic feedback by vibrating and by giving us a certain sound which tells us ki this was a wrong information that we had put in. And also our motor functions, that how this motor functions are important, the haptic feedback, the precision, the how different type of precision is important in different type of scenarios. Like for example, if we are playing a game on our phone where we have to shoot at the balloons which are falling from the top, then we have to be quick, and now this can be gained by, this is a skill which we can gain by practicing. So again, lot of things can be practiced. Our ear, eye, hand coordination, all of those things can be improved upon. And there are many games also that have been developed for improving specifically these motor skills in people, in elderly as well, who lose their motor skills over time due to age and other factors, environmental factors, plus maybe some other health conditions that may be there. And also understanding that the human brain has only a certain limit beyond which the information cannot be maybe held on for too long. So what all information do we present to the user so that they don't have to transfer it to their maybe say long term memory, and some information that they do need to transfer to their long term memory so that they can retrieve it and it stays with this for a longer time, because they'll be using this at many different stages of their life. So the application of these practical applications we will also see in the next few lectures. And so we will end this class here today. Thank you.